Hello, everyone. Good morning to those of you in the U.S. Good afternoon to everyone in the U.K. and beyond. Thank you for joining our webinar, Enhancing Marketing Communications with a Digital Workplace. My name is Kate Mary. I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at Akumina, and I will be your moderator for the webinar. Akumina is the employee experience platform, and we build highly personalized and integrated digital workplaces, modern intranets, dashboards, et cetera, for enterprise organizations like A&E Networks, ING, and Banner Health. So if you're interested in learning more about us, we invite you to visit us at akumina.com and follow us on social media. Before we get started today, I'll just go through a quick agenda and housekeeping items. We'll do a quick introduction to our speaker today, and it is Steve Binghall, who's an industry thought leader in this space. He's going to cover benefits of a digital workplace for marketers, the 5 C's of a good digital workplace, and then we'll have a brief Q&A at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to our speaker, Steve Binghall.
Thank you very much, Kate. Great to partner up with Akumina for another webinar. So let me just give you a little bit of a background about me. So I'm Steve Binghall. I am a digital workplace and intranet consultant. I've worked probably for about 20 years in this space, and I used to run a large global collaboration platform for a large accountancy firm, and I work for various different companies, but my main role is as a co-founder of a company called Spark Trajectory, and we do kind of training and consulting for intranet and digital workplace teams. And as you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm based in London here in the UK, and that's a picture of Tower Bridge, where I work quite often, so one of my favourite places in London. And I'm the author of a recent white paper called Enhancing Marketing Communications with a Digital Workplace. And I think it's available for everyone who's registered for the webinar. And today I'm really going to talk about some of the concepts and some of the ideas that are introduced in the white paper. So very much the webinar and the white paper are sort of are being meant to be sort of together. So let me dive straight into the topic. So I wanted to kind of start with this idea of what helps marketeers do a great job. And I think there's various different aspects. Obviously, having a great team and all the people in your marketing function, that's going to be the key thing that makes marketing teams really kind of exceed. Or succeed rather, but then also there's other elements which are having access to customer data, so you can get a good understanding of what makes customers tick and design kind of campaigns and marketing messages appropriately. Having a budget always helps. There's also a whole range of kind of apps and systems and technology platforms that people use. And if your organization has a kind of customer first culture, that can be really important in sort of paving the way for your stakeholders getting behind sign of really effective kind of marketing. And also something that's really important is a digital workplace. So if you consider, like, if trying to think of an analogy, so if you're playing a game or playing a computer game, your digital workplace might be like the console behind it. This is basically the kind of technology that you're using to help you be more effective in your role. So if we try and kind of define a digital workplace is generally regarded as the technology that an organization might provide for its employees, but it's also a little bit more than that, because it's delivered in such a way that it's kind of coordinated and consistent and optimized for the way kind of people work. So it's delivering a great kind of employee experience, or a digital employee experience. So for example, if you're thinking about a product like Akumina, where you can create kind of one place to go with different information and different applications you can access all from one place, that's the sort of thing of a kind of consistent and kind of coordinated and digital workplace. So it is the technology, but it's also the technology that's considered in a more kind of coordinated way that delivers an overall experience. So a good digital workplace can really make a big difference to employees. So it helps them carry out their role, helps with their decision making, helps them find what they need. So very often people struggle with technology or with the technology, either pieces of content or the apps they need. So a digital workplace has the ability to help you find and connect you to all the things you need. And there's usually some other elements, such as being able to communicate with your colleagues, elements that help you stay sort of productive and keeping on top with tasks. Also enabling flexible working. So often a good digital workplace will help you work from outside your physical location, work from kind of anywhere, anytime, and ideally on any device. So if you're on the go or you're working out in the field or working from home, a good digital workplace should enable you to be effective in your role wherever you are. And also ultimately, a good digital workplace helps you enjoy your working day, because there's nothing worse than a kind of frustrating technology experience. Everything should be kind of seamless and sort of easy to use. So that's what I regard as a sort of good digital workplace. Now, how does a good digital workplace help marketeers? Now, there's various different ways, and as a bad habit of consultants is to think of frameworks, all of which have different points which start with the same letter. So here we have the 5 C's, of the 5 C's of how a good digital workplace helps marketing teams. So the first one of these is communication and coordination. So in any organization, particularly if they are kind of large and complex, like a big global organization, for example, or someone who has different lines of business, you're going to have a whole load of different teams who are actually involved with delivering kind of customer experiences. So you're going to have the marketing team, you have the brand team, you might have different product teams, you might have the central team and local teams, you might be working with external agencies. So how do you communicate efficiently and coordinate your activities so you can deliver, effective campaigns and intricate marketing, which often requires a lot of coordination? The second element is, or the second of the 5 C's, is collaboration and innovation. So often, marketers need to be creative, delivering kind of or inventing, coming up with campaigns, but also giving input into new services and products, coming up with new approaches. So often you need that kind of deeper kind of collaboration and innovation between all those different teams who are involved in customer experience. And a digital workplace should enable that to happen. And the third of the 5 C's is customer data and insight. So how do you present and aggregate customer data that's kind of critical for your understanding of customer behavior and their kind of needs and the kind of messages that are really going to resonate with them. And that's kind of a lot harder than it might seem, because often most organizations actually have a lot of customer data, but it tends to be caught or sort of contained in different silos, and it's not always easily accessible or easy to bring it together. The fourth element, is collateral and credentials. So often large organizations will be putting out different digital assets, or they might be referring to kind of credentials. How do you make sure that those are actually up to date? And I think anyone who has worked in a large organization will know of an example where there's a local marketing team who are using just the wrong information. So how do you make sure, or how does your digital workplace help you deliver one source of truth for that kind of thing? And finally, content management. So this is basically the right tools to support effective publishing, and actually the workflow that goes into any one piece of content from the idea to kind of publication, like on your website or as a kind of like a webinar, for example. The actual number of people involved can be surprisingly large, so you need the right tools to support that kind of effective publishing and have a smooth process. So those are the five C's. Now, what happens when you have a bad digital workplace? It can really, it can actually impede the problems that it can exacerbate some of the problems that different teams have. So, for example, there can be kind of lack of consistency in your marketing messages with everyone doing their own thing. You can have out of date and inaccurate messaging. Processes are inefficient. You're obviously relying sort of on email. You can also be very slow to market, because if you can't coordinate a campaign that you want to quickly get off the ground, you kind of can miss that essential moment. And then, I think that all leads to kind of two things. One, there's a kind of fundamental lack of understanding of customers if you can't get at the data, and then that in turn leads to a sort of lack of confidence in marketing teams. So having a bad digital workplace can really impact the ability of a team to be effective. And of course, if there's loads of pressure on marketing teams and they need to deliver, and if they're not delivering, quite often it's not really necessarily down to the individual people. It's often down to the kind of systems that support them. So I think a digital workplace is a really absolutely essential. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at each of these five C's in order. We're just going to look at them in a little bit more detail. So the first of all is this area of communication and coordination. So as we said, when you have a large organization and you're sort of delivering customer experience, that really can involve a lot of teams who may be kind of distributed across different locations, different functions, different lines of business. So and they can be really quite disparate. So you can have like some local stakeholders. You might have a product team. You might have a kind of a sales team. You might have you might even have your legal and risk people involved. So if you're doing one campaign, you can, and it's a pretty big, a major campaign, that can involve a lot of people. So actually what marketers need is they need kind of a way to synchronize activities. They don't want silos. So this idea of synchronization, not silos, is really important. And basically, when you don't have a good digital workplace, what tends to happen is people rely on email for their kind of communication. And in my view, and I don't know, I'm sure all of you have possibly had or will have had an experience relating to this, but basically email is the enemy of effective communication, because it really can things get lost in translation. People miss out on things they need to do. People are working off different versions of documents, etc. So when you have a good digital workplace, you can escape that kind of all the traps that you can fall into when you're over reliant on email. So the kind of tools that can really make a difference are messaging. So a lot of people will find, or a lot of, if you're using Microsoft Teams, or if you're using Slack or Workplace by Facebook or Skype for Business, you will find messaging is a much better and more effective way of coordinating the activity of teams. Then there's other tools which you'll be familiar with. So having like a shared calendar or a content calendar or a schedule for a campaign. If you have kind of one source of truth which everyone can access, that can make all the difference when you're trying to coordinate marketing activities. And also task management. So something like Microsoft Planner, for example, is a good way to kind of establish who's kind of doing which tasks, setting different actions for people to carry out, and having that kind of open where everyone can see it, it gives people kind of responsibility and transparency that helps get those kind of things done more effectively. So that's communication and coordination. So I'm now going to go into the next of the 5 C's, which is collaboration and innovation. So I think this is a really interesting area because I think most marketeers are kind of creative in their kind of nature. They like to be able to use their creative spark and come up with new ideas and put those into action and then see them actually make a kind of difference. And that's why I think obviously people can be very you can get some really fantastic kind of campaigns, but also often marketeers can give their input into new products and services, and give that little bit of flair and spark to something that can to all those sort of external offerings. And often I think teams when they get creative, I think when they kind of collaborate between different parts of the customer experience ecosystem in a way. So let's say your brand team and your marketing team kind of can collaborate, or your sales team, or even customer facing employees, you then start to kind of get kind of interesting ideas, and that can really kind of spark innovation. And when you're kind of in a way, when you're also innovating, that can also spark kind of collaboration. So it's kind of like it's almost like a virtuous circle where teams are working together, proposing ideas, bouncing those ideas around, coming up with new ideas. People kind of get excited because they see new ideas, they want to collaborate more, and it's kind of where the sort of magic happens in a way. Another element, I think, where kind of collaboration and innovation is supported by the digital workplace is when you want to get input from the wider business. So often you might want to solicit ideas from a wider group of people, maybe on how you could improve a campaign or get original ideas. And if you have a digital workplace where you can share your ideas or your kind of collateral or your sort of output and get kind of feedback, it can be really, really powerful. That's not only in improving the quality of your marketing material, but also in developing and driving buy-in, because people want to get involved when they feel they're kind of being listened to and when they realize their feedback is valuable. And there's lots of different tools that can help with this, obviously web conferencing, but also things like whiteboarding, document collaboration where people can go in and edit documents real time, and Microsoft and some of the other larger tech companies, they spend a lot of money in developing more and more of these kind of tools, and now a lot of them kind of integrate into things like Teams. So they're getting kind of easier and more, they're kind of getting easier to use. Another area is sort of communities of practice and interest. So this is where you might have a community of practice is like a professional community where people might sort of bounce ideas off each other, and these can be really produce kind of new ideas. It's often where you may find one marketing team is working on something, and then another marketing team is working on something similar, and then people can kind of get together. Another very specific tool is around idea management. So this is ideation or innovation software where generally you can set a challenge, you can ask employees to submit their ideas, and then people vote on the best ideas, and then you can bring some of those through to kind of action. And that can be very powerful. I've seen lots of examples where ideation has resulted in some major new service lines and innovations. And one thing that's often not associated with kind of collaboration and innovation is like your employee directory. So this is a real core part of any good intranet or digital workplace. It's where you can look up and find and locate different experts or people with different skills. And if for example you are designing a campaign for to be for a particular market, so for example, let's say South Africa, you might be able to use your employee directory to find people who've had experience of marketing to South Africa, who maybe who've lived there or current teams there, so you can get some inside information on how to make that design that campaign and make it more impactful. So let's move on to the third of the 5 C's. So this is customer data and insights, and I think this is really key. So actually within most organizations there tends to be a lot of customer data. So this will be things around their preferences, their behaviors, their composition, etc. But often that customer data is kind of hidden in different systems and silos. So one of the things I do is I work with CMS Wire, who are quite well known, and they publish a lot of articles and kind of surveys about customer experience and digital workplace. And on their latest state of digital customer experience, one of the key issues that most teams found was that their customer data is just hidden in these silos. It continually came up as a real sort of one of the top problems. And if you think about it, you may have customer data in your CRM, but you also may have some output from a voice of the customer program, or you may have some survey or some a one-off survey you held which was about a particular product, or you might have feedback that's come from your website, or you may have notes that have been taken by agents in your call center and your contact center. So and how do you then bring this together? Because bringing that data together really drives that insight and gives you those look where you can spot those patterns that can really help you kind of understand what customers are doing, and that can really help you kind of make decisions. And it can be very specific. So for example, you might have some data around why particularly some of your customers are leaving your website on a particular page. You might then have some other data which is from your call center, which is about a particular service, that's something that's unpopular, and maybe that's something to do with the fact that they're reading about that service on the page where they're leaving. I don't know, it's those kind of things. And increasingly, particularly in kind of high touch sectors, or where there's a lot of digital transactions happening, that real-time access to that understanding can really drive you can drive some kind of competitive advantage. Also, one other thing is when you look at customer data and insights, you really mustn't forget GDPR. So even though these tools like your CRM system are going to help you, or a good digital workplace is going to help bring this information together, you also need to make sure different tools are GDPR compliant, and you've got the ability to say carry out the right to be forgotten, for example. So a good digital workplace also protects you and minimizes risk, because you're driving an experience that is also going to protect customer and employee data. And the tools that you use, obviously a CRM system is key, but dashboards really are an exciting way to bring data together. Anyone who's using Office 365 Power BI is an incredibly powerful way to build dashboards with real-time information covering a whole load of things, from customer sales data to how teams and customers are how they're behaving on your digital channels. And then obviously data visualization as well. You can use a whole load of different tools like Tableau to create some pretty funky graphs and other dashboards to help again make those kind of decisions. Right, so the fourth of the 4C or the 5 C's is collateral and credentials. So anyone who has experienced a message that has gone out from maybe from a local marketing team that is inconsistent with the brand, or is kind of ineffective, or is using out of date data, that is very, very common. But it can also, it's not only ineffective and inconsistent, but it can also be risky. So if you work in a regulated sector, for example, like financial services, and people are using out of date information, you can be it can be quite risky. So what you need is one source of truth for kind of all the collateral, your credentials and core information, and ideally your brand guidelines as well. Also probably covering kind of product and services information. And if you've got one source of truth, that's kind of half the battle, but then everything must be easy to find. So that's why when you have a good digital workplace, not only is there a lack of there's no duplication, of that kind of material, so people don't have to choose between, they know they're going to use the latest version of a PowerPoint deck or the latest correct logo, but they also must be able to find it as well. And there's a whole load of tools, intranets and the kind of specific brand portals. If you're using a lot of digital assets and pictures and video, then having a DAM system is important. And product and services information you might want to put into a kind of knowledge base, particularly if there are customer teams who are trying to, or customer facing teams who are using that to answer phone calls, for example. And then having a good search which ties it all together to make sure people can find what they need. And finally, the final of the 5 C's is content management. So if you take as I said at the beginning of the webinar, if you take one piece of content and track all the process that starts from one idea and then to a kind of published page, perhaps on your website, or like a piece of collateral, or like a white paper, for example, the actual workflows involved are actually quite complex. So it can involve different levels of approval. It can involve internal and external resources. It can involve people translating things. There might be people doing formatting. There might be people reviewing it for mistakes, for legal things. So loads of different things are happening. And and when you have that complex workflow, the bottlenecks are really common, because what you actually want to do is you want to have sort of approvals and reviews in there to make sure the right people are looking at it at the right time, and that's sort of minimizing the risk and making sure the content's better. But then if there are bottlenecks, what tends to happen is things end up not getting published, things get lost, people lose confidence, and then sometimes local teams may circumvent it and do their own publish their own stuff without going through the whole central content management process. And again, there's lots of tools which generally you'll find that central teams are kind of used to using, like content calendars and maybe some of the workflow notifications. But when a good digital workplace, then that opens it up to a much wider group of people, including working with external agencies, for example. So again, if you have a complex content management system, a complex content management process, you need a good digital workplace to make sure that those processes work properly and you can get your content out in time. So that's the kind of the 5 C's. And I guess at the end of the day, what I really wanted to say was every great marketing team deserves a great digital workplace, because that's what's going to make a difference. Because you can be you can be highly talented, you can be really, really motivated, but I think having a good digital workplace behind you then really allows you to focus on being creative, writing great content, creating great messages, formatting great, great experiences, and everyone can reach their sort of potential. So that was kind of what I wanted to say. So I think we may have some time for questions.
Thank you, Steve. We do have two questions that we can cover. So the first is, what is a good first step when you're planning to roll out a digital workplace at your organization?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. So a good first step, I think often doing kind of some research into actually, what are the problems that people are facing. So for example, today I've talked a lot about some of the issues that you might get with a bad digital workplace, but you really need to understand actually what's not working, what are the pain points, what's a digital workplace going to fix. So carrying out user research, observing, going around speaking to people, interviewing them, maybe running a few workshops, and then also speaking to stakeholders and getting their views on what's important for them. And then from there you can start to work out what the difference a digital workplace can make. And I guess also doing a little bit of product research as well. So I think webinars like this and vendor websites are very useful in thinking, okay, well look, this is what we could do with our digital workplace. Here is what products that can do. So I think it's kind of carrying out your research and then working from there.
Great, thank you. And the final question is, how would you recommend getting other teams on board with implementing a digital workplace at your organization?
Oh yeah, another good question. Well, I think they're kind of having the user research so you're kind of knowledgeable and you have some data is a really great starting point, because what you can do then is you can kind of take that data and you can go and speak to kind of different stakeholders. So if let's say you want to get your, I don't know, like your HR function involved, if you have some data relating to kind of HR issues, and you go to the head of HR or the equivalent and say, well, these are the kind of issues we're having, and this is how a digital workplace would make a difference. You can then target those messages to different groups. So I think actually there was an earlier white paper I wrote for Akumina called it's a series about how to write an employee experience kind of strategy, and I think we actually cover it in there. It's about looking for how to target your message to the different stakeholders. That's something you might want to look out for on the Akumina website. But really, it's about trying to work out what's in it for me, for those people you want to bring along on the journey. What are the tangible use cases that are going to make a difference to them, and how would you make the business case to them? So different stakeholders are going to want to use the digital workplace for different things. So today we've talked about a lot of use cases relating to marketing functions. And those are good. Some of those tools that I've described are also going to be useful for for HR functions and for training departments, etc. So I think it's around it's kind of a bit of a stakeholder management piece, but targeting the right messages with data.
Great, thank you, Steve. Thank you so much for participating in the webinar. Thank you to our attendees. And we are at 11:35 here in the US, so we'll sign off. There is a handout of the corresponding white paper attached to the webinar, and we'll also be emailing it out to all of the registrants. And as always, you can find the on-demand version on the Akumina website after the webinar is complete. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.